Hey guys, good to see you here. It's a little bit unexpected. I wanted to go live, but according to the schedule, the power was supposed to go out. It didn't go out. So here I am. I've been trying to dodge power outages. And sometimes when it does go out, then it does give me a chance to do other things, walk my dog, go to gym, all that sort of thing. I'm actually supposed to go for a walk with my dog and someone else and her dogs in half an hour, but the sun is only supposed to come up in an hour. So I'm hoping that I can sort of delay that. But anyway, the point is this is likely to be quite a quick episode. I'm kind of getting a little lazy. I normally would want to do this in a synced edited thing. It's not so much laziness as there's not a lot of time, and I kind of need to get it done within a narrower window because of kind of what's going on. So what we're going to talk about is this excellent article that appeared in KXAN, a Austin-based agency. It's written by Sam Stark, and it's just a really well written article. Just gives us so much information after such a long time with no information in this case. And we're going to drill down into this article, and then we're going to analyze that. And then obviously I'm going to do part 2 to Colin Strickland's transcript. That's also allowing us to get a better sense of who he is, also a better sense of the defense case, and all these sort of intrigue surrounding this case. So before we get started, just a quick hello to Sharon, Spirit of 1776. Stephanie, thanks for joining me as well at short notice. I think 5 minutes ago I said going live and you're here, so really good to see you there. Lauren May, I think Terry is also here. Esemko Valinsky, Kathy Chase. Yeah, so good to see you guys. I'm going to get going. So let's see what we can decipher. So one of the things I wanted to do in this particular live stream was I wanted the heading Frank Motion to be part of the title, but there just wasn't enough space in the title. A Frank Motion is actually mentioned here, is where you oh, actually, sorry, this is not the one that I want to be talking to you guys about. It's actually this one, Frank Motion. I think I actually put the wrong article up here. Let me just see if I can find it. That's a little bit embarrassing. KAITLIN Armstrong. What have I just done? Did I say press F11? There we go. Okay, KAITLIN Armstrong. Frank Motion. It's always tricky when I go from the one computer to the other, and the keyboard's just slightly different. Oh, there. No, it's not that one. This is definitely frustrating. Maybe if I Google Spitler had reckless disregard for the truth, maybe it'll come up that way. It could actually be that link. I think it's that link. Yeah, there we go. Armstrong's defense filed a Frank motion. It's quite strange. This is such a well-written article. So Frank motion is a legal proceeding when a court is asked to determine whether a police officer or detective lied, a Frank's motion, lied in pursuing an arrest warrant, right? And so guess who they have under the cosh here? It's basically Spitler. That's actually spelled wrong and should be Spitler. Did he have reckless disregard for the truth? Can you guys see that? Right? So that's actually the link I want you guys to look at. The other one that I showed you is also analysis that we want to look at, dealing with the anonymous callers, what they heard. They heard a statement. They didn't think it was literal. Did it turn out to be literal? Anyway, so we'll look at that. Okay, so that I've just put the link to this article, and it's quite amazing how sort of basic the title is of this article. It's such a well-written article, but it's got such a basic title. Timmy, just calm down. Let's try and get you into the Madonna and Child pose. Okay, there we go. Okay, Timmy, now you sort it out. Okay, so so that's that article. Okay, so we're gonna kind of deal with aspects of this article. If there's time, we'll go into the other one, but it sort of is additional, additional to what I want to kind of get through.
A woman accused of killing pro cyclist
yeah, I mean, just very briefly, KAITLIN, I guess, appeared in court directly. There've been no photos. There's been quite a strict moratorium on that sort of thing, which has made it a lot difficult. But of course, we can rely on reporters who are there, local reporters from Austin, to give us the details, and that is what we're going to be dealing with right now. Just see what
back in court today for a pre-trial hearing.
See here.
Now, cameras were not allowed inside, but we did have a reporter there.
Court.
And they say Armstrong's attorneys focused on the day she was initially questioned shortly after the deadly shooting. The defense team talked to 2 detectives today, including the lead.
There's Rick Cofer on the right. As far as I know, this is the defense team. It's Rick Cofer, this gentleman, I'm not sure who he is, and then could be that guy as well.
Investigator in the case. As we've told you, Armstrong was brought in for questioning.
And it's all to do with KAITLIN Armstrong. Did she commit a crime? Was there a love triangle? Yes or no, right? Okay. PW, good to see you here as well. So let's get going with this Frank's motion. So to me, it's really interesting, the legal process, the legal arguments, obviously it's quite smart people, educated people that are trying to, they're trying to do their, what's the word? They're trying to they're trying to mute this side. Yeah. They are trying to wage intellectual warfare, in a sense. I mean, that is what the whole legal business is. It's a kind of intellectual warfare, outmaneuvering someone with loopholes, with facts, with arguments, with semantics, right? And it's not necessarily the best case that wins. So it's not the best evidence that wins. It's the best argument that wins, right? The best narrative. So let's kind of get going with that. So what's kind of going on right now is that the real suspect in the murder of Mo Wilson isn't the murderer, it's the cops. Let's go after them. KAITLIN Armstrong's counsel has been pursuing a 2-tiered approach of late in terms of this last appearance in court. So firstly, the first aspect of this 2-tiered approach is to question, well, really to interrogate and undermine the lead homicide detective, Richard Spitler. How often have we seen that? The lead detective is basically becomes the target. We saw that in the Madeleine McCann case. We saw that in the John Benet Ramsey case. We saw that certainly in terms of the prosecutor in the Amanda Knox case. And how often, when you have that take place, do those cases struggle in terms of the prosecution? You even had that to some extent in the Stephen Avery case. The detectives, the prosecutors also attacked. I think he also had it in the West Memphis 3 case, right? So this is not new. It's kind of the Darvo approach: deny, attack, reverse, all that kind of thing, right? Don't go after the suspect, go after law enforcement. Same thing happening in the Kylie Rodney case with a lot of people in the true crime community. So that's what he's doing. So it's basically questioning Richard Spitler, and then the second part of that is getting the account of Katie Connor, the Austin Police Department APD homicide detective who first interviewed Armstrong about Wilson. Now, I think that's the first time I've seen her name, Katie Connor. So that's a name we're probably going to need to get to know better as well. It would be great to get the 10-minute transcript of that discussion. I mean, it would be even greater to get the video of that, and maybe when it goes to trial, maybe that will be released. We'll see. So Richard Spitler, Katie Connor. Let's deal with Richard Spitler first. Katie Connor was the first detective to interview Armstrong about Wilson. But let's deal with Richard Spitler first. So KAITLIN's defense alleged that Spitler had reckless disregard for the truth when filing the arrest warrant. And I've actually just put the entire arrest warrant on crimerocket2.com. So if you're fuzzy about the details of the arrest warrant, you can go to crimerocket2.com. Let me just put basically Crime Rocket, the number 2 and .com, and it's, I think, the top story there, right? So that's quite simple. Are there reckless statements? Are there statements that are just totally not true? Did Spitler lie, right? And what is quite interesting with the affidavit is it's quite long. I think it's about 4 pages long. So there's quite a lot of narrative to examine in order to test this idea. Were you reckless? Did you take some license in coming up with this narrative to base your arrest on, the arrest affidavit on, right? So let's test that. Is there reckless disregard for the truth? Are there blatant lies? Are there serious distortions? Right? Let's kind of have a look at that. Okay. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring up pages from that affidavit and put them on the screen next to me, so that you guys can sort of just see that while I'm talking. So it's much ado about this. Timmy, don't kick my keyboard. It's much ado about this document. You know, is the text reckless? Is it written in a casual way that is very cavalier with information, right? And you can kind of what's the word? You can gloss through that so long and try and see for yourself. Does it seem like he's not been factual? Does it seem like he's not been very what's the word? Does it seem like he's not been very specific? You know, what is going on? That is there an area that Cofer can find where you can say there is reckless disregard for the truth, right? So let's go into that in a bit more detail. So KAITLIN's defense alleged Spitler had disregard for the truth when filing the arrest warrant and allowed police to arrest Armstrong, and that he intentionally left out crucial information in the document. So it's almost it's quite clever. It's almost a double argument. The one is what you put in was reckless and inaccurate, right? So, wow, you put that inside the document. That's not right. That's not right. But then you also argue, well, why didn't you put X, Y, and Z in the document? So you're arguing against what's in the document, and you're arguing against what you think could have been or should have been in the document. Okay, so let's deal with that. Again, just think about the irony here. So the detective had reckless disregard for the truth. This is a homicide detective. He's got a reckless disregard for the truth, not the person that he's investigating for someone's murder. who's saying that she didn't do it. So when we're thinking about reckless disregard for truth, and this is inside a courtroom, this is about justice. We're not thinking about someone who's suspected of murder. We're thinking about the person that's trying to do his job, trying to investigate for murder. But anyway, it raises this really amazing moment. Let's go to another page from the document. There's another page from the document. It raised a really amazing moment that is highlighted in the KXAN article. It's Rick Cofer's actual words where he says, just to be crystal clear, everything in that affidavit is true, but everything in what you wrote is true. And Spitler responds, yes, sir, everything is true. And obviously, you know where that's going to go. You know that he's going to be challenged on that. Well, what about this? Is this true, right? So let's have a look at what they sort of go into. Okay. Cofer's not going to go through the affidavit, which is, as I say, pretty lengthy, and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And you're going to try and find either errors, and that's fine. If he finds errors, that's fine, because it does need to be accurate. And if it's not, that does need to be highlighted. But the other side is he wants to get Spitler to concede that certain things that appear probably true could also be possibly not true, such as whether KAITLIN Armstrong was jealous, right? But just think about what we're talking about. Reckless disregard, right? And I think you can argue it in two ways. You could say, if you say that this person is jealous and you're trying to implicate them in a murder, you could say with some justification, that is a reckless disregard for this person's rights. How dare you? It's not true. They're not jealous. And all of this is really a serious allegation with no substance, right? On the other hand, all you are saying is that someone seems to be jealous. And if that's true, that actually builds into a motive, which is also a very serious thing, right? So anyway, let's go into that in a bit more detail. So the difficulty Spitler faces, the detective faces here, is someone may have said that KAITLIN is jealous, but can the detective prove that? Now, you would imagine that on paper, you could imagine that on paper that would be quite easy to prove. Just go to Colin. Just go to Colin and say, Colin, is your girlfriend quite a jealous, possessive person? Maybe go to his sister, go to other people. But then the thing is, are they going to be honest about that? If they're not, then you kind of have a problem. Whether or not KAITLIN was jealous, if her family won't say that kind of thing, or they don't believe that, or her boyfriend won't say that, or he doesn't believe that, you may have a bit of a problem proving something that seems either self-evident or seems obvious. That obvious thing, and I think so far this case has felt a lot like that. That seems obvious, that seems obvious, that seems obvious. And yet KAITLIN's lawyer has kind of said, no, it's actually not that obvious. You think there's a vehicle driving by there at the time, driving by the crime scene. How do you know that that's KAITLIN's vehicle? You can't see her inside. Can you see the license plate? So he's trying to say some of those obvious assumptions you're making aren't that obvious. Prove them. Can you prove them? Right? Yeah, it is building a case. Good to see you here, Yvonne. Okay, yeah, semantics. Okay, so for example, in the warrant, this is quoting from the article. This is quoting from that. Spitler wrote that Wilson and Colin Strickland were in a romantic relationship. So that's what he's arguing about. You had a reckless disregard when you said that Colin and Mo were in a romantic relationship. How could you be so reckless in saying something like that? Well, at least Cofer wasn't asking Spitler to explain whether Colin and KAITLIN were in a relationship. But anyway, this is the part of the original affidavit that Cofer has a problem with. It's this. Can you guys see that? Let's bring it up. This is the part that he's not very happy with. Shall I read it? Wilson and Strickland then had a romantic relationship, right? That's Mo and Colin. Before Strickland ultimately began dating Armstrong again. Strickland advised while he and Wilson were dating, Armstrong called Wilson on the phone, ... The part that he doesn't like is that they had a romantic relationship, specifically the word romantic. That's reckless disregard for the truth. How dare you? Where did you get that information? Did you get it from word of mouth? Prove to me that you know for a fact that they had a romantic relationship. Now, again, you might say, well, that should be quite easy. Surely Colin Strickland would say that. And it's not that easy, but the other side of that is it's not that hard as well. So let's deal with that. That is right, and we're going to deal with that in a moment. But that is the argument, is to say, how do you know they had a romantic relationship? So clearly the main thrust of Cofer's defense is to say or to show or to cast doubt on the idea of a love triangle, right? Have you noticed that has been coming up over and over again? There was no love triangle. I don't know where you got that ridiculous idea. That's what he's trying to challenge. Okay. So in other words, say or show or demonstrate there is no proof, and thus there was no love triangle to begin with. If you can't prove there was a love triangle, then there was no love triangle. If you can do that, then there's no motive as well. So going back to this article, Cofer spent several minutes questioning Spitler on whether relationship was an accurate term to describe what was going on between Strickland and Wilson. Really, is relationship the right word? Don't you want to, can't we call it something else? They had a friendship. We bumped into one another here and there. Are you sure you want to use that word relationship? Because if you do, can you prove it, right? So can you see how it's a semantic argument? I'm uncomfortable with this word relationship, and I think you've had reckless disregard for the truth. Can you prove that it's definitely true that there was a relationship, right? Often when people are having flings or on-off relationships, there is an aspect to it that is not known. It's not totally public. On the other hand, sometimes they are. Sometimes there are people who know about it. Sometimes there are people who say it. But it actually turns out that this is not such a long walk in the park to sort out. And I'm going to show you guys how and why, right? How can Spitler basically say, you know what, maybe it's not that reckless that I thought that they were having a relationship, right? So do you remember Strickland himself initially making headlines, Stephanie mentioned this, in the immediate aftermath to the murder by saying he wasn't in a relationship with Wilson, meaning at the time of the incident. He was basically saying, you know, when we went swimming together, you know, when we went and had dinner together, you know, when I saw Mo the last time, we weren't in a relationship, meaning at the time. You might say, yeah, but that's not going to be good enough. What we need to know is, were they ever in a relationship, right? Can you see the text in this article? It's from Cycling Magazine. Colin Strickland denies having had ongoing affair with Mariah Wilson, right? This is from June 20th, right? You can see if you go a little bit further down, it says here, he said he dated Wilson briefly, right? So again, you could just say from that, well, doesn't that mean if you date someone, isn't that a romantic relationship? You might say, yeah, but that's not enough. Maybe you just met them once. No, it didn't really go anywhere. Okay, let's take it a little further than that. before we do, I can't help but wonder whether Cofer is simply bargaining on short-term memory. That's just sort of what's going through my mind. If you think about it, this happened in May. It happened so long ago, it actually feels like it happened last year. And so you sort of wonder, there was a period where none of this was in the news. So is KAITLIN's defense bargaining on short-term memory and short attention spans? Because it's true that Strickland did say that he wasn't in an ongoing affair, but then he did say this as well. Do you remember this? Do you remember this? This was a post on Instagram. Let's bring it up. So let's read it. From Colin Strickland, I'm reeling from grieving Mo Wilson's death and from the facts that have emerged during the investigation. I cannot begin to imagine the pain. There is no way to adequately express the regret. Actually, there is. One way to deal with that is, help with the prosecution or help to find a killer if you can. Anyway, he says it'll be a small consolation that I've cooperated fully with investigators. What do you think about that statement? It'll be a small consolation that I want you to know I've cooperated fully, and I will continue to do so. And yet you have a situation now where, well, how do we know that KAITLIN's partner was in a relationship? Well, surely you could just find out from Strickland, but it sort of feels like you can't just find out from him, right? And that's why we've got to go through this narrative. And it says here, as a point of clarification, this is the important part to stress. Mariah and I had a brief romantic relationship from late October, early November that spanned a week or so while Wilson was visiting Austin, right? But there it is in his own words. We had a romantic relationship. It doesn't really matter if it was brief. It matters that that's how he saw it. And that's probably how she saw it as well. It's also spanning 2 months, October going into November. And this crime literally happened just a couple of months later, right? There was still something in the narrative going into January, right? So this is October, November. The narrative we're going to deal with now goes into January as well. So where they had another encounter, right? Bear in mind that this is not a case where Colin lives in Austin and Mo lives somewhere else in San Francisco. Because they're both cyclists, they take part in the same events, and this brings them together, right? And isn't this what happened quite frequently? Big events brought them together. Did it bring them together in ways that it didn't bring KAITLIN and Colin together? It's a question, right? Okay, so that's that page, and then there's also this page from the Instagram post. Bring it back up. She and I had both recently ended relationships. So he talks about his relationship with KAITLIN as a relationship, and he talks about his relationship with Mo as a relationship. And there it is. After our brief relationship in October, which actually also went into November, we were not in a romantic relationship. But the point is, they were prior to that. That's the point. There. We did have a brief romantic relationship. So I wasn't in court. I don't know whether this was brought up. If it wasn't, you would imagine that it should have been, or it could have been. But the point is that I don't think it's entirely accurate to say that there was no relationship. You guys agree? It is not entirely accurate. Now, if you think about it, if someone, were you guys able to hear that? I think it's been muted. Were you able to hear that? Susan Smith, good to see you here as well. Wishing B. When it comes to crime, romantic can even be when someone is attracted enough to feel romantic. It could even be, doesn't need to be romantic. It could just be someone cheating on someone else. I mean, you could argue that Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger wasn't romantic. I think it was. I think he thought it was. I think she thought it was. But you could argue that it was just about sex. So it doesn't have to be romantic. It's nevertheless what someone else going to feel like about that situation. What are you going to feel like? Well, you love me, you're in a committed relationship with me, but you're with someone else, right? You couldn't hear that. Okay, I think it's because this is muted. Sound is muted, so how can I unmute that? I think I've got to do this, unmute. Why am I struggling? I've got another thing open, and so I've got to close that now. Otherwise, you're going to hear that as well. How do I unmute this? Not quite sure why this is so hard. Sound is muted. Continue muting. No, I don't want to continue muting. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Okay, let's play it again. Not quite sure why this is such a big deal, but anyway, here we go.
That's not entirely accurate.
Right, so it's just on this question of were you in a relationship or not? And if you say, well, you had a total disregard for the facts, how can you say that they were in a relationship? I don't know if it's entirely accurate to say they weren't in a relationship, right? I don't know if it's, you guys see? Do you guys see that? Stephanie says, Mo even point blank asked him about where they stood. Absolutely. Now, bear in mind, this isn't the actual court case. So you don't really have to go into a lot of these things that deeply. And so one does wonder if that is sort of part of what's going on. Just want to see if there's a response to this. Okay, it looks like I'm going to be missing my dog walk. Quite unfortunate. Okay. Right, so let's continue. So I think it's just as well that someone took screenshots of Strickland's statement, posted onto Instagram, and then reposted onto Twitter, because Strickland has actually since deactivated his Instagram. So again, you would ask that question, how long are memories? Because if you'd forgotten about this, how would you have gotten hold of this information? It is still part of the media narrative, right? Here you actually have a tweet talking about clarifying his relationship with her, and there's the date, May 20th. There he says, as a point of clarification, right? But the point is, Strickland himself concedes in his own public statement that he had brief relationships with Mo in October of 2021. It actually refers to brief relationships. There it says brief relationship, but elsewhere it says, I just want to see if I can find it. She and I both recently ended relationships. Just trying to see where he says brief relationships. Anyway, so Oh, yeah. So he says, after our brief relationships in October of 2021, we were not in a romantic. I think what he may mean by that, I suppose you could argue that what he means by that is, I had a brief relationship and she had a brief relationship, so we had brief relationships, both of us together, right? Anyway, where is off there? Looks like it's not properly quoted in the news because it says after our brief relationship. I wonder if that's not is that the same that as I have it? Where is it? After our brief relationship. Oh, okay. So my bad. He just refers to our brief relationship. I thought he might refer to our brief relationships, meaning that it was on and off quite a few times. Okay, my mistake there. That's actually something that I think comes out of the one of the news articles. So that's misquoted. So along the lines of the word relationship, it's not accurate. I feel it feels like Cofer's case is hanging by a very thin thread. This idea that, well, is the word relationship accurate, right? Do you guys agree with that? Let me play this.
Sorry. You are hanging on by a very thin thread. And I dig that about you.
Okay. So I think the relationship thing is a very thin thread. There's not really that much to that, but the whole thing that Cofer's got to do is just create doubt, right? Okay. So I'm also not sure what's platonic and professional about a young guy and a young girl going swimming together on a summer evening. Bear in mind, those are his words. He said, we only had a platonic and professional relationship. He actually just says the word one regarding, see, he says, after that, we had a platonic and professional one. He's talking about a relationship. Doesn't really want to use the word, though. But what is so platonic and professional about a young guy and a young girl going swimming together on a summer evening and then having dinner together and then the guy dropping this girl off at home on his motorcycle? So going back to the article, it says Cofer also alleged Spitler filed dates and times incorrectly, relied too much on information from anonymous callers, and that he didn't corroborate reports from other Austin Police Department staff working on the case. When state attorneys cross-examined Spitler, they said he was working off the information he had available and wrote the affidavit with care. Any errors Spitler made were not severe enough to qualify as reckless disregard for the truth, the prosecutors argued. So I think you have to slow Cofer down when or if he makes statements like reckless disregard for the truth. The law is often, as we said earlier, about semantics and narratives, which is why I think I'm quite good at it. But the law can also be an ass for the same reason. Just because you got a word wrong or the word isn't entirely accurate doesn't mean it's entirely inaccurate or that something didn't happen. So you might say, yeah, we weren't in a relationship, it was a fling. Yeah, but something was happening. You weren't with that person and something was going on. Right? Doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if you weren't in a relationship, the word relationship is wrong, absolutely nothing happened. You know, it's a case of where there's smoke, is there fire? Well, there is smoke, right? So I think there's sometimes a kind of an anal approach in law to certain word choices, and where you say, this is the wrong word, therefore this is a reckless disregard for the truth. I think you can respond to that and say, okay, in hindsight, maybe this word is perhaps a better word. Perhaps unstable is better than jealous, or perhaps fling or on-off relationship is better than intimate relationship, or perhaps it isn't. So I suppose you could put the ball on the other foot and say, okay, if you don't like that word, what word would you use? Probably the legal response would be, Counselor, I'm asking the questions, right? That would probably be the response. Elise, good to see you here. Does that make sense, what we're sort of talking about? Okay, then I think there's more substantiveness to Cofer's line of attack, not a lot, but a little more substance when he deals with the process and procedures around KAITLIN's interview, right? Katie Connor, as I said earlier, she was the female Austin Police Department officer in charge of that aspect. So going back to this article, quote, also questioned was Katie Connor, an APD homicide detective who was the first APD officer to interview Armstrong about Wilson. Also quite interesting, a female officer interviewing a woman. You could theoretically imagine some criticism if it was a male officer saying, well, she may have felt intimidated or whatever. But you can see that a female officer interviewing a female person feels appropriate. I suppose you could argue that. So the article goes on to say the APD arrested Armstrong because it already had a warrant from a previous incident, one where she allegedly did not pay for a Botox session and was charged with theft of service, a Class B misdemeanor. Now, if you think about what this Frank's motion is all about, is you had reckless disregard for the truth. I can't believe it. I can't believe you said that. And yet his client was actually already had a warrant out for arrest based on not paying for something. But the problem is you weren't accurate in your report. That's the real reckless disregard for the truth. Anyway, Armstrong was arrested, brought into the APD station for that charge, for the Botox session. We know about that she didn't pay for. But Connor questioned Armstrong on her connection to Wilson and not about the theft of service charge. So it's on that point that they're not very happy. KAITLIN's defense aren't happy with that. It's like, you tricked her. How dare you ask her questions about that? Again, I think one's got to be reasonable. That is something you can rely on in law. What would a reasonable person do in the situation? Is use the reasonable test in the situation. So it is a fair point. You brought her in and then you actually questioned her about something else. So I guess when Cofer criticizes Spitler for getting dates and times wrong, I think we must also be specific. What times and dates did you get wrong? Well, they got KAITLIN's date of birth wrong, which ultimately helped his client. So you got that wrong, but ultimately that allowed her to leave, right? As a result of that error, KAITLIN was released. Instead, Cofer is arguing that KAITLIN was brought in on a separate charge and then questioned about something else. That's fair, but KAITLIN was also allowed to leave, wasn't she? Well, not quite. This is where it gets quite interesting. So how long was KAITLIN kept there, you could say, against her will? So according to the article, just as Connor began to talk with Armstrong, I guess about Mo, an APD officer informed her that the birth date on the warrant was incorrect and that Armstrong was no longer under arrest. That's pretty quick. So very early in this process, they realized, oopsie, right? Very early. And that's, I guess, to their credit, that they realized quite early on, okay, we did make an error here. Connor then told Armstrong that she was allowed to leave, but continued to ask questions about her relationship with Wilson and Strickland. This lasted for about 10 minutes. A video was played at the hearing. So I'm not sure who played the video. I would imagine it's the defense played the video, right? And we've sometimes seen screen grabs of that video where you see KAITLIN, right? But think about this. Oh no, 10 minutes. You spoke to her for 10 minutes. we shouldn't scoff, because if there is a crack, Cofer will probably find it, I think. But I'm not sure I'd call 10 minutes a crack in the case. Would you? I suppose certain jurors might. You might say 10 minutes is a long time to falsely implicate yourself, or 10 minutes is plenty of time to be manipulated. On the other hand, if you don't want to talk about something, 10 minutes isn't really that long, right? I suppose for KAITLIN, it felt extremely long, but let's say KAITLIN's innocent. Then talking about something you don't really want to talk about, it's not really that long. It's not like you were held there for half an hour or an hour or multiple hours, just 10 minutes. And let's face it, you did come to the police station based on not paying for something. Wasn't that valid? Anyway, one wonders whether that'll come back to life, that particular charge. Then it says Armstrong's defense argued that Connor detained Armstrong and didn't allow Armstrong to leave after the warrant didn't hold. Now you can almost imagine some of these words entering the media narrative. You can imagine Cofer saying things and perhaps hoping that the media are going to be writing it down and saying, wow, law enforcement detained Armstrong against her will, or you could have that as part of the media narrative, and that could have an influence, right? But think about that word detained, and think about that whole idea of reckless disregard for the truth. So do you see, those are semantics I wouldn't use. I wouldn't use the word detained because it's a very strong word. That's the word Cofer uses, and I want you to think about what that word means. Detained, what does it mean? It's a strong word. I spoke about something not relevant is maybe a better way of putting it. We spoke about another case that wasn't really relevant to the charge. Isn't that what was going on? Speaking. She wasn't detained, she was talking. Other words I prefer are she was held up or she was delayed. I'm not sure it's true to conflate talking to someone for 10 minutes with taking or putting someone into custody, which is what detained implies. I suppose you could, on the other hand, argue that they were going to arrest her, so she was in their custody. But then they continued talking to her. So I suppose you could argue that she was detained for 10 minutes. But I think you could also argue, was it the intention of law enforcement to falsely detain her? Well, then why would they say, oh, jeepers, we got the date wrong here, we're letting you go, right? So you can kind of argue it in a few different ways. I'm also not sure it's fair to say they didn't allow her to leave. I'd prefer to say they wanted her to stay. Putting the shoe on the other foot, and this I think is quite important in terms of reasonableness. KAITLIN's beau had just been questioned. She had to know that because she was in a relationship with him and possibly implicated in a murder in Austin. This is from her perspective. Her boyfriend, she's in a serious relationship with him. He's just been questioned by the authorities. Didn't she know that? He's possibly implicated in a murder in Austin. Didn't she know that? He was the last person to see someone alive, or one of the last, and you wouldn't happen to have any questions about that yourself. You wouldn't want to actually ask questions about that yourself. You're at a police station, or would you rather not know anything? I don't want to ask any questions about why you asked him questions. You wouldn't be curious yourself about that, and more than curious, emotional, anxious, concerned. I mean, when last did someone you know go to the police in a relationship? When last did someone you know go to the police in terms of a cold-blooded murder? Someone that you were in a relationship with. And so if someone you know was questioned by the cops, wouldn't you have any questions? Now, not that long ago, someone I don't know really at all, I was just told, someone's daughter's gone missing. Could you please look into this? It was a local case. And then her daughter was found. And then I had a follow-up question. So what happened? I'm just curious, like what happened? And are you telling me that KAITLIN wouldn't have any of those questions? Why wouldn't you? Shouldn't you? That's the other side of it. Anyway, so according to the article, let's just bring it up a little bit bigger. Really good article. According to it, quote, state attorneys conversely asserted that Connor was within her right as a detective to ask about Armstrong's connection to Wilson. Also, that Connor informed Armstrong that she was free to leave 5 times. So that is quite important. KAITLIN, I need to talk to you about this, but you're free to leave. Talking. You are free to leave, but I'm going to ask you something else. Every time that she says you're free to leave, why don't you leave? That's the other side to the story. I must say Graham is definitely an apologist for KAITLIN. Every time I've seen Graham on here, he can't seem to believe that it's possible. And I definitely recognize your name. Graham says, what about Mo Wilson's ex-boyfriend that no one's talking about? What about him? I mean, it is not even brought up in this case, in this article. So I would put that back to you. Yeah, what about him? So anyway, indeed, Connor informed Armstrong she was free to leave. There you go. So going back to the article, the state attorney showed a video of the interview where this is from the state attorney. So showing Strickland in a fetal position in the corner. So they're talking to him and he's curled up in a fetal position when APD was questioning him about Wilson. Strickland was a ball on a floor. He was told that he was the last man seen alive with Wilson. One of the state attorneys said, last man to see Wilson alive, well played. So you see, they can also use clever semantics. So I think that's quite useful that they could actually use their own footage and say, this is what he looked like. He was really caught up in this. He was really emotional. And then you can kind of ask the question, was she? Wasn't she? Why wasn't she? And that's exactly what happened. Conversely, the state attorney argued Armstrong had just been informed a woman from their community had been murdered, and she was as cool as the other side of the pillow, he said. I thought that was a fantastic turn of phrase. I love that. I love that. You can see the prosecutors also have some good turn of phrase, right? That's what I used here. She was as cool as the other side of the pillow. It conjures all sorts of thoughts, that statement, doesn't it? So if you put the shoe on the other foot and you say everything APD did was wrong, okay, so you have a young woman who was murdered, and please don't pay attention to a lovely young couple, KAITLIN and Colin, who are living happily ever after in Austin. So someone was murdered. It's tragic. It's terrible. But please just don't look at these 2 particular people. Everything else is fair game, right? And I think what's his name? Graham would like this. Graham would say, yes, let's look at everything else besides Colin and KAITLIN. So what happens when you do that? So you say, we're not going to pay attention to them. We're not even going to look in their direction. Okay, so who was the last person to see Mo Wilson alive? Oopsie. Okay, so we'll forget about that question. We'll forget about that question. Okay, so who in the entire city of Austin was quite close to or with Mo? Bear in mind, she's not from Austin. So as a way to sort of address this whole thing of let's ask someone else. Okay, so who was quite close with Mo in Austin? oopsie, oh crap. Okay, let's think of another question. Okay, here's something. We have some CCTV and it's on a vehicle that, damn, okay, throw that away. Let's think of another question. You see, so seriously, if APD was all thumbs and left feet in this case, what was the right way to investigate this case? Let me guess. Sniff around the stolen bicycle that wasn't really stolen. Is theft or moving a bicycle from A to B, because it wasn't actually stolen. It was not like the bicycle disappeared. It simply moved from A to B and it was left down the street. Let's sniff around that. Is stealing a bicycle a worse crime these days than shooting someone to death, point blank in the chest 3 times? I think that's the other side of this, is you may be trying to defend your client, but there's also someone else that died in this case, a 25-year-old elite athlete. What about her right to justice? What about her right to have an investigation around the people in her orbit? And what about taking that seriously and not having a reckless disregard for the right way to pursue that, the right way to investigate the circumstances surrounding the murder of a 25-year-old elite athlete? What about her rights? What about her rights to justice? What about her rights to an investigation? What about the last person that saw her alive? What about the circumstances surrounding her life? And you want to talk about, I don't like the word relationship. This is a murder investigation. Yeah, the bicycle was a red herring. Please don't use all caps. We don't do that on this channel. So that's not the end of this. On Monday, Cofer's Frank's motion, I think, takes aim at an anonymous caller, I think. I wonder whether they will still be anonymous after Monday. But there is additional detail around that, around the anonymous caller. I just want to see if I need to get going. Okay, I think it's too late. I think it's too late, unfortunately. That's too bad. Well, I think since I'm here, we might as well deal with the other aspect, right? Which is let's see if I can find it. Cofer asked the lead detective, why rely on these anonymous callers' statements as evidence that Armstrong killed Wilson when there is Strickland? Okay. That's from this particular article. That's from that particular article. Let's bring it up. Okay, let's quickly go through this. This is a lot shorter than the previous thing. Okay, so it is a good question. Why rely on the anonymous caller's statements as evidence that Armstrong killed Wilson when there is Strickland? So can you guys answer that? What do you guys think about that? Stephanie, the friend of mine has already been out there for half an hour, but she wanted to go before sunrise. And to me, that's not like a great time to be going out. You know, it's dark and it's kind of miserable. So to me, it's just unreasonably early. That's just how I feel about it. I might take Timmy anyway a little bit later. What do you guys think? What's your response? Why rely on these anonymous callers' statements when there's Strickland? Terry says, because they have a dog in the fight. That's not what I'm looking for. There's another reason. Not looking for that either. Not looking for that either. Why? That's coming a bit closer. Why is law enforcement not relying so much on Colin Strickland? I mean, were you guys here for when we went through the transcript of what he said? Is he a very reliable witness? Is he a helpful witness? Is he a good witness? Is he helping the prosecution's case? So some of you say he's evasive. Some of you say he's not really that forthcoming. But I think it's worth thinking about the answer to that question. Why wouldn't they want to rely on, let me bring up the question again. Why wouldn't law enforcement and the prosecution really want to rely on Strickland in terms of things like jealousy? I don't know if you guys tuned into when we spoke about what Strickland said about her being jealous, or that he didn't really think that she was, right? I think he said, if she was, I wouldn't have been with her. So there is a sense maybe that they don't trust him, or that it's not really working out. Paddy says he is very good at identifying colors. There may be that sense that he's not helpful to the prosecution. But someone did raise a good point. This does kind of add another dimension to it. So let's deal with that. As I say, I think it's a good question, but it's worth answering. Is it because Strickland isn't either a very good or a very reliable witness? Is Strickland a willing witness? I think that's the other question. Is Strickland a willing witness? And we kind of dealt with that at the very end of the transcript that we dealt with. And by the way, I'm going to be continuing with that. I'm going to be continuing with that transcript in part 2. So that'll be tomorrow, right? We'll be continuing with the transcript. I think it'll be quite interesting. We'll look at Colin Strickland a little bit closer. The interesting thing about the anonymous callers is that there were 2, not just 1, and they seem to be corroborating a similar thrust. So this is quoting from the article. Is it this article? Yeah. I'm connected to the professional biking community. This is quoting from what the one caller said. And I know Colin Strickland and KAITLIN Armstrong very well, both of them. And the caller described a social gathering in early 2022 when she spoke to Armstrong about Strickland's relationship with Wilson. Okay, so what do we get from that? The caller is a woman. It was obviously played in court. Would have been nice to have heard that. But the social gathering was, I think, a dinner in January surrounding a world championship event. Do you remember how I kind of made a little bit of fun of the way that question was answered, with a lot of sort of stuttering and self-interruptions, right? How do you know about this? Well, we looked on Mo Wilson's phone, right? Remember that. So let's go back to that. The caller goes on to say, this female caller says, there's a female and a male. The female says, Armstrong was shaking and telling me how upset she was. She was very, very upset. She used the word, she said, I wanted to kill her. The caller said, Armstrong might be someone to look into. No. I really wanted to kill her. Those were the words there, right? I really wanted to kill her. And the anonymous caller said Armstrong told her this that night, the night that they were at this dinner. You might say, well, that's just hearsay. That's just what one person said, but then there was someone else as well. If true, this sketches an impression not of someone who is a little jealous, but literally shaking, trembling with jealous rage. It's unfortunate that such an important witness has chosen to remain anonymous, but more than likely she's a pro cyclist and can't have herself dragged into the negative publicity due to what her sponsors have said, but also cares enough about the situation, probably cares about Mo Wilson as well, that she wanted to come forward. This part's quite interesting. The caller said she was shaken by a conversation with Armstrong. So the fact that Armstrong was so shaken, so angry, and what she said actually shook her. Then she said, but she perceived what Armstrong was saying as not literal. What do you think about that? I mean, we've been talking about semantics. Was it literal or wasn't it? I really wanted to kill her. Does that mean I really didn't want to? Okay. So that really is the question. Was it literal? Wasn't it literal? Was it said? Wasn't it said? Can the caller prove that she was a roommate or something? Can she prove that she was there? Well, if she was a competitor, probably she can. Now, I often see in true crime cases how criminal psychology is a process. All psychology is a process. It's integrated. It's how the consciousness makes sense of one's place in the world and one's perceived place. In criminal psychology, the basic pattern is often as follows: feeling, emotion, thought, word or words, and then deed, right? The same applies to you. If you're about to do something, it might be going on holiday, it might be getting married, it might be getting divorced, it might be taking a different direction in true crime. It starts with a feeling, then an emotion, then a thought. It manifests as an actual thought. The feeling becomes a thought that is somewhat more the materializing of that emotion. Then that thought becomes words. At this point, those feelings and emotions and thoughts are bubbling to the surface, so much that they bubble out of the mouth, right? In other words, the words that you say are just the bubbles at the top of all of that whole reservoir of feeling and emotion and thoughts as well. And when the thoughts go on for long enough, they eventually lead to a deed, right? Does that make sense? And so the question is, on this thought or word, I really wanted to kill her, was there a deed? And you can go in the reverse direction. Was there a deed? Were there words? Were there thoughts? Were there emotions? Were there feelings? It's a yes or no question. What do you think the answer is? Let's go through that again. There was a deed at the end of the day. Mo Wilson was shot. That's the deed. There were words about that. Are the words and the deed connected? And then also, were those words connected to other thoughts? Were those thoughts connected to other emotions? Were those emotions connected to other feelings? Okay. So what you may notice is the approach I take to true crime is you try and find connections, you try and find links, you try and find ways to integrate things, right? Whereas often in a defense case, they do the opposite. They're trying to disconnect things. What do you base that word on? Can you prove it? And it feels like they take something random over here and they dispute that. They take something over there. And in other words, what they're trying to do is break those connections. They're trying to get a sense that things are disconnected, fragmented, that they're not part of a triangle or a circle or a fabric. They're trying to tear that fabric apart. That is often the psychological substance of a defense case. Create doubt. How do you create doubt? Break those connections, break those associations, break those links, right? All of those things. And the opposite applies with the prosecution. Make those connections, make those links, develop that fabric, right? Think about the Kylie Rodney case, that process, the process of making connections, talking about a fabric that creates a certain scenario, and talk about the defense case of, well, I think that is what's happening, and so you have these very random, fragmented ways of arguing, but it's like a defense case, a very similar way. And so which one makes more sense, the fragments or the integrated argument that is sometimes not easier to prove? Sometimes it's easier to disprove and attack than it is to prove something, especially when people are kind of wanting to be private about something. Okay. It's also why so often mass shooters, you see them expressing their intention right before they do something. They have a feeling, they have an emotion, it's all building up, it builds up into thoughts. The thoughts become temptation, fantasy, things that they play with in their minds, they turn it over in their minds. It often happens with criminals. Criminals actually fantasize about this easy solution. If only this person wasn't there, right? If only you could just get rid of that person, and then it becomes literal. What if I got rid of that person, that they didn't just disappear, they literally were made to disappear, right? But it's this idea of, if only that person wasn't there, my life would be so good. If only that was like that, I could live happily ever after. Chris Watts probably felt the same. If only I didn't have a family, I could have this wonderful relationship with this person, right? That's how it starts. Feelings, emotions, thoughts, fantasies, playing with those thoughts, weighing those thoughts, evaluating those thoughts. Then those thoughts become words, and then maybe becomes a deed. This is why, sorry, just in terms of the Chris Watts case, remember he repeatedly said, I will fix this. That's what he said to Shanann, I will fix this. Well, that's what he was trying to do. He was in a fix, he knew he was in a fix, and you're starting to think, how am I going to fix this? I will fix it. How am I going to do that? It also comes up in the Patrick Frazee case where he said, no body, no crime. What do you think he did in that case? There was an attempt to totally eviscerate a body. There was the thought, no body, no crime. The words, no body, no crime. And then the deed, no body except, well, there was a crime. And he ended up paying for it. So this notion also comes up in the Suzanne Morphew case. But coming back to this article, it's interesting, the whole connection, right? Thoughts, feelings, and so on. According to this article, let's bring me back a little bit. This caller and a different caller, this conversation between another anonymous caller and Spitler, mentioned they were aware of a love triangle between Wilson, Strickland, and Armstrong. So this idea of a love triangle came up from these anonymous callers. The second caller also said he overheard Armstrong saying he wanted to kill Wilson at the same party. Sorry, she wanted to kill Wilson at the same party. Now, the impression you actually get is that KAITLIN is at a party, Colin is at that party, Wilson is at that party, or what we know for a fact is that Wilson and Colin are at the party. And so this is apparently expressed in that setting. And this is in January. You must remember, even if you're not in a relationship with someone, you may be aware that there could be residual feelings, and it often is like that. And so how do you feel when someone comes into contact with someone again? Well, Colin would repeatedly be coming into contact with Mo because they were both sort of elite athletes at these important cycling races, like world championships. So they are often going to be at relatively close quarters with one another at these events. And sometimes KAITLIN wouldn't be there. Colin would have to be there because he's participating, it's his job. Mo would have to be there for the same reason, and KAITLIN wouldn't maybe necessarily always be there. Also, on the road, in the actual event, the spectators get sort of pushed aside. They've got to sort of be kept behind cordons, and so you have athletes mingling with one another in ways that the spectators can't either. Yeah, that's right, Katie. That's also right. Okay, let's wrap this up. My point is a love triangle here. That's one of the statements by the anonymous caller. And that's kind of a way that a lot of us have understood this case to be. It's been in the headlines as the love triangle case in Austin, the cyclists' love triangle, right? And that's what Cofer is trying to sort of create, unmake. It's not a love triangle, it's a love rectangle, or there was no love or whatever. But that is his biggest problem, is that it is understood to be, or believed to be, or perceived to be a love triangle. Wow, so you've got two witnesses to a very crucial statement here. It's a man and a woman. Going back to the article, the defense team representing Armstrong said David Spitler said there was no love triangle, and they relied too heavily on these anonymous callers' statements. So apparently David Spitler said that there was no love triangle. I'm not quite sure whether they're trying to say, or he was saying, well, there wasn't a love triangle at the time, based on what he understood. That to me is different. It's different. But anyway, they're using Spitler's own words, saying he didn't say he said it's not a love triangle, so it's not a love triangle. So it's kind of like, to me, again, double playing it in the same way that you attack the affidavit and you say, well, what's in there? We're going to attack that. We're also going to attack what's not in there. In the same way you attack Spitler and you say you were dishonest. But when you say, he said it's not a love triangle, oh, no, he was 100% honest about that, right? If I do this, am I going to come back into focus? Okay. So this is also quite interesting. Why wouldn't you rely on a statement of intent in a case like this? So in a situation where someone says, I intend to do this, right? This statement, I intend to do this, I really intend to do that. Why would you not look at that? Why would you say, please don't look at that statement of intent or possible statement of intent? Going back to the article, the defense team said that some of the information they provided was fallible, meaning the information that these callers provided. For example, the male anonymous caller said Armstrong was against vaccinations, but the defense team said this was not true because they actually had Armstrong's vaccination record. Again, it feels to me like this is happening.
Sorry. You are hanging on by a very thin thread.
Right? It feels like that's happening. And I mean in the sense of the following. So if you say, wow, this information is so fallible, it's so false. Armstrong wasn't against vaccinations. You can have a vaccination record. You can be vaccinated, but nevertheless be against vaccinations. And why would that be the case? I think Stephanie might be able to answer that. I think there are a lot of people who are against vaccinations, but they've got a vaccination record. Why? Well, because they've got to travel. You know, if the situation is you can't fly somewhere if you're not vaccinated, well, if you want to fly somewhere, you might reluctantly get vaccinated, right? So, it's trying to disconnect things in a way that I'm not sure if it's totally accurate. I don't know if it's entirely accurate, right? So let me just say what I've written here. Hello, you can be against vaccinations, but you get vaccinated so that you can travel, for example. And that is exactly what she did do. I wouldn't be surprised if Strickland was also against vaccinations as a elite athlete, but had them done so that he could travel to races, as pro athletes invariably have to. There are other athletes we know of, like Novak Djokovic, who's opposed to vaccinations and hasn't been able to take part in certain events. So others may feel the same, but feel like, I've actually trained for this. I don't really want to get vaccinated, but if that's the rule, then I guess that's the rule, and then they'll do it. It's like not really rocket science, is it? Yeah, work requirements as well. That's the other thing is in sport, if you wanted to take part, you've got to also show that you're vaccinated. Right? So do you have this sense that the nitpicking is a little desperate, saying that information is fallible, but arguing about accuracy about vaccinations is hardly of material or substantive relevance? The other thing taking place here isn't just KAITLIN's defense, testing the prosecution's case for weak spots. I think that's the other side to it is what they're doing is they're getting the prosecution to reveal their cards, the cards they intend to play, the cards that they have, and what they can prove and what they can't prove. So I think no matter how critical one is of this early part of the legal process, what really matters is when the case comes in front of a jury and the cards that are laid down then. Does that make sense? So that is my story. And we're going to deal with Colin Strickland's statement in a bit more detail in this live. It'll be tomorrow, and should be quite interesting. I'm not 100% sure of the time, but there are two things coming up as well. In addition to that, I'll be doing TCRS Book Club, and I'll also be doing Van Gogh Letters number 32. That's Sunday. So on Saturday, I'll be doing TCRS Book Club. I actually thought I brought the book with me that I'm going to be dealing with, but let me quickly go and get it to show you which book that'll be. Give me a second. Okay, so we're going to be dealing with this book, Fruit of a Poison Tree. It's about the murder of this young lady, very attractive lady who died in a really horrible way. I'm going to be reading about the first page or two from the introduction, which is riveting. It really is excellent true crime writing, and that's really what I want to share with you guys. And then I'll also be sharing some of my own writing from this book. It's actually a fiction book, the only book that I got a publishing contract for from an American author, American publication company, American publisher. And so I'll be reading an excerpt from that chapter, and then we'll also be looking at some other things. So look out for that. That's tomorrow. Then also, thanks very much, Jennifer Strickland. Jennifer says, thank you for all your hard work. You have become my favorite to watch in just the last few months. Jennifer, are you related to Colin Strickland at all? I mean, if your surname's Strickland, are you any kind of relative? Just be interested to know. But thank you very much for that. Contrary Marge says, can you hold your book up? This book you can't actually get anymore. You can't buy this book anymore on Amazon. I've actually asked to have it taken down, but you can buy the Kindle version that is the first fifth of the book. So I basically carved the book into 5 pieces. That is still available. But this book, I actually asked the publisher to take down for several reasons. So that's what that is. This is the other book that we're going to be looking at, right? Fruit of a Poison Tree. Okay. Cool. Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining me. This was never going to be a very long live. I thought it would actually be even shorter than it was. I think I'm going to be taking my dog for a little walk, and maybe I'll still meet the dog walker that I was going to walk with. So we'll see. The sun's starting to come out, and I don't know if you guys can hear the birds singing. So I'm just trying to see if Jennifer, what she says to my comment there. Contrary Marge, so Stephanie has just put a link to that up there. So you're going to have a look at that. Terry says, I'm glad you've waited till sunup. Thanks, Terry. Okay, that is it from my side. I wonder if there's anything else I want to talk about. I did get a couple of thanks. I got 4 $9 thanks from, was her name Lisa, that I just want to say thank you very much for. And they were like for different videos. I'm just not quite sure if I can find it. I'd just like to thank
Every
her
sales manager
for that, because that was definitely quite something. Lisa Breck gave me 4 $9.99 thanks in 4 different videos. Thank you very much for that. If you are watching this on replay, remember that you can share, and you can like, and you can hit the thanks button. So that's definitely appreciated if you do that. For the rest of you guys in America, in California, in Connecticut, and everywhere in between, I hope you guys have a good night's sleep. I hope you wake up tomorrow refreshed, so that you can have a really great weekend, right? We haven't heard from Jennifer Strickland, but maybe we'll see a comment a little bit later on. Anyway, so guys, thanks for making it. Oh, Lisa Breck is here. Thanks a lot, Lisa. That's really kind of you. Thanks, I really appreciate that. Yeah, so thanks a lot for joining me, and I'm definitely going to be continuing coverage of this case, and we're going to go through that transcript through it with a fine-tooth comb. I thought the first read through was definitely interesting. We definitely found a different dimension to this case, a deeper dimension. We're going to continue that process in part 2, so look out for that. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Thanks everybody, mods, members, subs, and also for the super chat. Thank you very much. Take care, guys. See you next time. Have a wonderful weekend.